The porterhouse steak was cooked medium rare, pink in the center, resting in a pool of juice and melted butter. It was a good piece of meat, aged properly, seared with competence. I respected competence. It was the only thing I respected. Unfortunately, the conversation at the table was rare, raw, and utterly lacking in substance. "Look at the stitching, Bill. Just look at it." My son-in-law, Greg, leaned across the white linen tablecloth, extending his arm so the cuff of his jacket rode up. He was pointing at the buttonhole on his lapel. It was a suit that cost more than my first car. A midnight blue bespoke number from Savile Row, or so he had told me 3 times in the last hour. "Hand-stitched," Greg said, his voice booming over the ambient noise of the palm. He wanted the neighboring tables to hear. He wanted the waiters to hear. He wanted the world to know that Greg was a junior partner at Sterling and Finch, and that Greg had arrived. "You can't get this kind of detail off the rack. It's impossible. It's an art form." I cut a piece of steak. I chewed slowly. I didn't look at his stitching. I looked at his eyes. Exhibit A. The pupils were dilated. Exhibit B. A sheen of perspiration on the upper lip despite the restaurant being kept at a crisp 68 degrees. Exhibit C. The third scotch and soda he had ordered in 40 minutes. Conclusion, Greg was terrified. "It's a nice suit, Greg," I said. My voice was low. I didn't boom. I had learned a long time ago that the person who whispers is the one everyone strains to hear. "Very blue." Greg laughed. It was a loud braying sound that made the couple at the next table flinch. "Very blue. That's good, Bill. That's funny." He took a large gulp of his scotch. Then he looked at me, his eyes sliding critically over my own attire. I was wearing my Sunday best, a charcoal polyester blend suit I had purchased at a department store in 1995 for a funeral. It was shiny at the elbows. The lapels were too wide for current fashion, but it was clean, it was pressed, and it had pockets deep enough to hold a subpoena without folding it. "You know, Bill," Greg said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, patronizing tone, "we really should get you an upgrade. I mean, come on, you look like you're going to traffic court in Des Moines. No offense." "None taken," I said. I took a sip of water. "I'm serious. Let me treat you. Take you to my tailor. Get you something with a little power, a little authority." He winked at my daughter, Sarah, who was picking at her salad, looking exhausted. "He's a retired government clerk, Sarah, but he doesn't have to look like he's waiting for a bus." Sarah smiled weakly. "Dad likes his suit, Greg. Leave him alone." "I'm just saying," Greg pressed, pouring more wine into his glass with a shaking hand. "Appearances matter. In my world, perception is reality. You walk into a room wearing a $5,000 suit and people assume you know the law. You walk in wearing that, and they assume you're there to fix the copier." "I see," I said. "So the competence is in the wool." "Exactly." Greg pointed a finger at me. "That's it. It's signaling. It's all signaling. But hey, you got that government pension, right? Steady, safe, boring. You don't have to worry about the sharks." He leaned back, satisfied with his assessment of the world. He was 35 years old. He'd been a lawyer for 8 years. He thought he was a shark. He wasn't a shark. He was chum. I had spent 40 years in the federal prosecutor's office for the Southern District of New York. I had indicted 3 cartel bosses, 2 senators, and the CEO of a bank that was too big to fail, until I made it fail. They called me the Hangman because I didn't plea bargain. I didn't negotiate. I executed the statute. But Greg didn't know that. Sarah knew I was a prosecutor, but she was young when I retired. She remembered me coming home late, tired, carrying boxes of files. She didn't know the specifics, and I never talked about the work. The work was ugly. The work was necessary. When I retired, I put it in a box and buried it. To Greg, I was just Bill. The old man who fixed their toaster and didn't talk much. "I'm fine, Greg," I said. "The suit serves its purpose." "Suit yourself." Greg chuckled at his own pun. "More steak?" Then the phone rang. It wasn't a normal ringtone. It was the jarring, aggressive ping of a Priority 1 notification from the firm's encrypted messaging app. Greg froze. The fork halfway to his mouth stopped. He looked at the phone sitting on the table face up. The screen lit up. Sender. Sterling Arthur, managing partner. Message, urgent. FBI on premises. Do not speak. Come in now. The color drained from Greg's face so fast it was like someone had pulled a plug. He went from flushed and arrogant to a sickly, pale gray in 3 seconds. His hand spasmed. The fork clattered onto the china. His elbow knocked the wine glass over. Cabernet Sauvignon splashed across the white tablecloth. It looked like a gunshot wound. It splashed onto the cuff of his $5,000 bespoke suit. "Greg?" Sarah asked, alarmed. "Greg, what is it?" Greg couldn't speak. He was staring at the phone. His mouth was opening and closing like a landed fish. "The FBI," he whispered. The volume was gone. "The FBI is raiding the office." "What?" Sarah grabbed his arm. "Why? What are you talking about?" "They're on the 40th floor," Greg choked out. Sterling just texted me. They're seizing the files. The Omnicorp merger files." I placed my knife and fork down on the plate. I aligned them perfectly, parallel, 4 p.m. position. "Omnicorp," I said. My voice was dry. "That's the merger you closed last week, the one you were bragging about, the offshore structuring." Greg looked at me. His eyes were wide, terrified, pleading. He looked like a child who had broken a window and heard the police sirens. "I signed the diligence," Greg whispered. Tears were forming in his eyes. "Oh, my God. I signed the diligence reports. Sterling told me it was a formality. He said the senior partners had already vetted the assets. He just needed a signature from the lead associate to clear the closing checklist." "You signed off on the asset valuation?" I asked. "Yes. And the tax compliance. And the shell entity disclosures. Without verifying them, there wasn't time." Greg's voice rose to a hysterical pitch. People were staring now. "The deal had to close by Friday. Sterling said if I didn't sign, I was holding up a $1 billion deal. He said it would impact my partnership track. I trusted him." I picked up my napkin and dabbed my mouth. "You trusted Arthur Sterling," I said. "A man who was investigated by the SEC in 2004 for insider trading. A man who narrowly avoided disbarment in 2011 for suborning perjury." Greg stared at me. How do you know that?" "I read the newspaper, Greg," I lied. I didn't read the newspaper. I had built the file on Sterling in 2004. We couldn't nail him then. He had thrown a junior associate under the bus. History, as it turns out, was a circle, and my son-in-law was standing in the middle of the target. "We have to go," Greg stammered, standing up. His legs were shaking so bad he almost fell. "Sterling wants me there," he said. "Do not speak. Come in now." "I have to go explain. It's a mistake. It has to be a mistake." "Sit down, Greg," Sarah said, terrified. "We should call a lawyer." "I am a lawyer," Greg screamed. "I'm a partner at Sterling and Finch. I can fix this." He grabbed his jacket. He didn't notice the wine stain. He ran toward the door. "Sarah," I said, standing up slowly. I buttoned my polyester jacket. "Get the car. You drive. Greg is in no condition to operate machinery." "Dad, what do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Is he going to jail?" "Not tonight," I said. "Tonight is just the arraignment of facts. The jail comes later." We walked out of the restaurant. I left a $100 bill on the table to cover the meal and the cleaning of the tablecloth. I always paid my debts. The car ride was a study in disintegration. Sarah drove the Audi SUV. Greg sat in the passenger seat, curled into a ball, scrolling through his phone with frantic thumbs. I sat in the back in the dark, watching the city lights blur past. "They're seizing the servers," Greg moaned. "The group chat. Oh, God, the group chat. I made jokes. I made jokes about the Cayman accounts. Hiding the treasure. It was a joke. It was banter." "Text messages are admissible evidence, Greg," I said from the back seat. "Intent can be inferred from banter." "Why are you doing this?" Greg snapped, turning to look at me, his eyes wild. "Why are you kicking me when I'm down? You don't understand how high-level finance works, Bill. You filed papers for the DMV. This is complex litigation." "It sounds like fraud," I said. "Wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering. Title 18, United States Code, Section 1343. Up to 20 years per count." Greg vomited. He didn't get the window down in time. He threw up all over the dashboard of his expensive German car. The smell of scotch and expensive steak filled the cabin. Sarah screamed and swerved the car. "Pull over," I said calmly. Sarah pulled into a bus stop. Greg opened the door and fell out onto the pavement, retching. I stepped out of the back seat. The night air was cold. I walked over to him. He was on his hands and knees, ruining the knees of his $5,000 suit. "Get up," I said. "I can't," he sobbed. "I'm finished. Sterling set me up. He knew the assets were toxic. That's why he made me lead counsel. He kept his name off the signature lines. He used me as a heat shield." "Yes," I said, "he did. That is what men like Sterling do. They consume the young to extend their own lives." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, a clean, white, cotton handkerchief. I handed it to him. "Wipe your mouth. Stand up. You're going into that building and you are going to keep your mouth shut. Do not speak to the agents. Do not speak to Sterling until I tell you to." Greg looked up at me. For the first time, he didn't look at me with contempt. He looked at me with confusion. "You?" he rasped. "Why would I listen to you? You're a nobody." "Because," I said, "I'm the only person in this car who isn't crying." I grabbed him by the collar of his bespoke jacket and hauled him to his feet. "Get in the car." The offices of Sterling and Finch were located on the top 10 floors of a Glass Needle in Midtown. At midnight, the lobby was empty except for security and a swarm of men in blue windbreakers with FBI printed on the back in yellow letters. They were carrying boxes. Greg whimpered when he saw them. "Just walk," I said. "Don't run. Running implies guilt." We took the elevator to the 40th floor. The silence in the car was oppressive. Greg smelled of vomit and mints. Sarah was holding his hand, her knuckles white. The elevator doors opened. The reception area was chaos. Agents were imaging hard drives. A frantic secretary was crying in the corner. Standing in the middle of the room, looking like a king surveying a battlefield, was Arthur Sterling. He was a tall man, silver-haired, tanned from weekends in the Hamptons. He wore a suit that made Greg's look like a costume. He was speaking to a lead FBI agent, his hands spread in a gesture of cooperation. Shocked agent, truly shocked. We had no idea Mr. Davidson was operating outside the firm's compliance protocols. If he signed those documents, he did so as a rogue agent. Greg stopped. He heard his name. Davidson. "He's blaming me," Greg whispered. "He's literally doing it right now." Sterling saw us. His eyes narrowed. He excused himself from the agent and walked toward us. He didn't look worried. He looked disappointed, like a father whose son had crashed the car. "Greg," Sterling said, his voice dripping with sad condemnation, "I am so glad you came. We need to get ahead of this. You told them I was rogue, Greg stammered. Arthur, you told me to sign. You sent me the memo. I sent you a memo asking you to perform due diligence, Sterling said smoothly. If you signed off without doing the work, that is negligence, Greg. Criminal negligence. And now the Bureau tells me you were joking about hiding treasure in the Cayman accounts? I am appalled. Sterling shook his head. He looked at Sarah. I am so sorry, Mrs. Davidson. We will do everything we can to support Greg during his transition. But obviously, his partnership is terminated effective immediately. We cannot have a criminal element in the firm. Criminal? Sarah cried. He did what you told him. I told him to be a lawyer, Sterling said coldly. He chose to be a co-conspirator. Sterling pulled a document from his jacket pocket. This is a statement, Greg. It says that you acted alone, that the senior partners had no knowledge of the asset inflation, and that you accept full responsibility in exchange for the firm paying your legal defense fees. If you sign it, we get you the best defense money can buy. If you don't, well, you're on your own against the Department of Justice. He held out a gold pen. Sign it. It's your only chance to stay out of federal prison tonight. Greg looked at the pen. He was shaking. He reached for it. He was going to sign. He was going to sign his life away because he was weak, and because he was scared, and because he thought the man in the expensive suit held all the power. I stepped out from behind Sarah. I had been standing in the shadow of a potted ficus plant. In my gray polyester suit, I was practically part of the wallpaper. I walked forward. My shoes clicked on the marble floor, a distinct, rhythmic sound. I reached out and took the paper from Sterling's hand. I didn't take the pen, just the paper. Excuse me, Sterling said, looking at me with the annoyance one reserves for a janitor who has interrupted a meeting. This is a privileged conversation. Who are you? I'm the father-in-law, I said. I put on my reading glasses. I scanned the document. It's a confession, I said, thinly veiled as a cooperation agreement. Clause 4. I admit to knowingly falsifying asset valuations. Clause 7. I waive my right to assert privilege regarding communications with senior partners. I looked up over the rim of my glasses. This is garbage, I said. Sterling laughed. It was a harsh, dismissive bark. And who are you to judge legal documents, sir? Greg, tell your father-in-law to wait in the lobby. This is grown-up business. This document, I continued, ignoring the insult, is an attempt to suborn perjury. It is also an obstruction of justice under 18 U.S.C. Section 1519. Seeing as you are asking a witness to alter the narrative of a federal investigation while the agents are literally in the room. I tore the paper in half. Then I tore it in half again. The sound of the tearing paper was very loud in the quiet reception area. Sterling stared at the pieces of paper fluttering to the floor. His face turned red. You senile old fool, Sterling hissed. Do you have any idea what you just did? You just sent your son-in-law to prison. Agent Miller. He waved over the FBI agent. Agent, this man is obstructing... Sterling stopped. He looked at me, really looked at me. He looked at the way I stood. Feet shoulder-width apart, hands loose, chin up. He looked at my eyes. I took off my glasses. I folded them and put them in my pocket. Hello, Arthur, I said. It's been a while. 2004, I believe. The McKinnon case. You were wearing a better suit then, but you had the same sweaty look on your upper lip. Sterling froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He squinted, trying to reconcile the image of the old man in the cheap suit with the memory that was clawing its way up from the bottom of his nightmares. Halloway, Sterling whispered. It was a sound of pure horror. William Halloway? Mr. Sterling, I said, I believe you were about to accuse me of obstruction. Sterling took a step back. He bumped into the reception desk. I thought you were dead," Sterling stammered. "I heard you had a stroke or retired to Florida." "I retired to Queens," I said. "The bagels are better." I turned to Greg. He was looking at me, then at Sterling, trying to understand why the titan of law was trembling before the grandpa of traffic court. "Greg," I said, "pick up your briefcase." "What?" "Pick it up. We are leaving." "But the FBI," Greg said. "The FBI is here for the records," I said. "They don't have an arrest warrant for you yet. If they did, you'd be in handcuffs. They are fishing. And Mr. Sterling just tried to use you as bait." I turned back to Sterling. "Arthur," I said, "my client, Mr. Davidson, will not be signing any statements. He will not be answering any questions tonight. He is asserting his Fifth Amendment rights, and he is retaining counsel." "Counsel?" Sterling laughed nervously, trying to regain his footing. "You? You've been out of the game for 15 years, Holloway. You don't even have a license." "I kept my bar card active," I said, "for recreational purposes." I stepped closer to him, into his personal space. I smelled his cologne. It smelled like fear. "And Arthur, if you mention his name to the agents again, I will consider it a hostile act, and I will come out of retirement. I will not come for the firm. I will come for you." I leaned in. "Objection, counselor," I whispered. "Assumes facts not in evidence, specifically the fact that you are going to survive this night." I turned to the FBI agent who had walked over. "Agent Miller," I said. "William Holloway, former SDNY, badge number 4092. The agent's eyes widened. "The Hangman." "Good evening, son," I said. "My client is leaving. If you need him, call my office. It's the kitchen table at 42 Elm Street. Don't come before 8 a.m. I like my coffee first." I grabbed Greg by the arm. "Walk," I said. And for the first time in his life, Greg walked with me without saying a word. We didn't make it to the elevator. "Hold on," Sterling's voice cracked across the marble floor of the reception area. It wasn't the smooth, practiced baritone of the managing partner anymore. It was sharp, jagged, the sound of a man realizing the safety on his weapon was jammed. "You can't just leave. This is a crime scene." I stopped. I didn't turn around immediately. I checked my watch. 12:47 a.m. "Greg," I said quietly to my son-in-law, who was trembling so violently his teeth were audible, "do not speak. If he asks you the time, you plead the fifth." I turned slowly. Arthur Sterling was standing by the reception desk, his face a mask of controlled panic. He gestured to a glass-walled conference room down the hall, the main boardroom. The inner sanctum. "Inside," Sterling hissed. "Now, before the agents start asking why the hangman is walking out with my junior partner." I looked at Agent Miller, the young FBI lead who had recognized me. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, professional courtesy. He was giving us 5 minutes. 5 minutes, Arthur," I said. "Then my client walks." We entered the boardroom. It was an expanse of cold ambition. The table was a 20-foot slab of polished mahogany that probably cost more than my house. The chairs were Aeron, fully loaded. The view of the Manhattan skyline was breathtaking, a billion lights mocking the darkness inside. Sterling slammed the glass door shut. He didn't offer us a seat. He paced the head of the table, running a hand through his silver hair. "You have some nerve, Holloway," Sterling began, trying to reinflate his ego. "Storming in here, making threats. This isn't the Southern District in the 90s. You have no jurisdiction. You have no standing." I pulled out a chair for Sarah. I motioned for Greg to sit. He collapsed into the seat, burying his face in his hands. I remained standing. I buttoned my polyester jacket. It felt like armor. "Standing?" I asked. "Arthur, Let's dispense with the theatrics. I am representing a witness in a federal investigation. A witness you just attempted to coerce into signing a false confession. It was a standard cooperation agreement, Sterling shouted. It was a suicide note, I corrected. And by handing it to him, you just committed a predicate act under the RICO statute. Sterling froze. Don't quote RICO to me. This is a securities issue. It's a civil matter. I reached into the inside pocket of my cheap suit. I pulled out a small, spiral-bound notepad, the kind you buy at a drugstore for 99 cents. I clicked my plastic ballpoint pen. Title 18, United States Code, Section 1961. I recited from memory. My voice was monotone. I wasn't performing. I was reading the tombstones. Racketeering activity means any act or threat involving murder, kidnapping, gambling, arson, robbery, bribery, extortion, or dealing in obscene matter. I paused. Extortion, Arthur. You told Mr. Davidson that if he didn't sign a false statement accepting liability for a crime he didn't commit, you would hang him out to dry. You threatened his livelihood. You threatened his liberty. That is extortion. That is a predicate act. I wrote a date on the notepad, October 14th, 2024. And since you used the firm's email server to send him the initial diligence instructions, that's wire fraud. Predicate act number 2. I looked up. Congratulations, Arthur. You've just turned Sterling and Finch into a continuing criminal enterprise. Do you know what the sentencing guidelines are for a RICO conspiracy? It's not a slap on the wrist. It's 20 years to life. And they seize the assets, the building, the accounts, the Hamptons house. Sterling leaned against the mahogany table. He was breathing hard. He looked at Greg, then at me. You're bluffing, Sterling sneered. You have nothing. Just the word of a scared junior partner against the board of directors. Who are they going to believe? The man in the $5,000 suit or the kid who vomited in the lobby? They will believe the evidence, I said. Res ipsa loquitur. The thing speaks for itself. The evidence is shredded, Sterling laughed. The servers are encrypted. Why do you think I kept Greg in the dark? Why do you think I used him? Because his signature is the only thing that links the fraud to the firm. If he goes down, the trail ends with him. He is the firewall, Greg sobbed. He's right, Bill. I signed everything. I'm the only name on the diligence reports. I looked at Greg. I felt a flicker of pity, quickly extinguished by necessity. Pity is useless in a courtroom. Leverage is everything. Greg is not the firewall, Arthur, I said softly. Greg is the key. I walked around the table. I moved slowly, my rubber-soled shoes silent on the plush carpet. You remember 1998, Arthur? Sterling flinched. I don't know what you're talking about. The Cayman accounts, I said. The Blue Water Shell Companies. You were representing the McKinnon cartel, money laundering, clean and simple. That case was dropped, Sterling snapped. Insufficient evidence. It was dropped, I agreed, stopping right behind him, because my key witness had a boating accident 3 days before the grand jury convened. A tragic loss. Sterling turned to face me. His eyes were cold, dead things. Accidents happen, Bill. The world is a dangerous place. It is, I said, but I never closed the file. I just misplaced it in my head. I leaned in close. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath and the expensive scotch he had been drinking before the raid. I needed a witness inside the mechanism, I whispered. I needed someone who could explain how you structure the layering, how you move the assets from the operational accounts to the offshore holding companies. I pointed a finger at Greg, and now, 20 years later, you hand-delivered him to me. Greg didn't just sign the papers, Arthur. He has the metadata. He has the revision history on his laptop. He has the drafts where you, personally, edited the valuation figures. Sterling went pale. He doesn't have access to the partner drive. He doesn't need it, I said, because you were sloppy. You sent him the red lines via email because you were in a rush to close the deal before the quarter ended. Greed makes men sloppy, Arthur. It makes them fast, and it makes them careless. I looked at Greg. Greg, do you still have the laptop? Greg nodded, wiping his nose with my handkerchief. It's in my bag, in the car. Good, I said. Now, that laptop is now evidence in a qui tam action. Qui tam, Sterling choked. Whistleblower suit, I translated for the room, under the False Claims Act. If Greg turns over that laptop to the FBI voluntarily, he isn't a co-conspirator anymore. He is a relator. He is acting on behalf of the government. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of the hangman adjusting the knot. And do you know what happens in a qui tam suit, Arthur? The whistleblower gets a percentage of the recovered funds. If the fraud is $1 billion, Greg walks away with 15%, and you walk into a federal penitentiary. Sterling slumped into one of the Aeron chairs. The fight went out of him. He looked like a balloon that had been pricked. What do you want? Sterling whispered. I don't want anything, I said. I'm retired. I want to go home and watch the History Channel. Name your price, Sterling begged. We can settle this. We can pay Greg a severance, a consulting fee. 2 million? 5? I am not here to negotiate, I said, my voice dropping to absolute zero. I am here to sentence. I ripped a page from my notebook. I placed it in front of him. I clicked my pen. Here are the terms of your surrender. Sterling looked at the blank page. He looked at me, terrified. 1, I dictated. The firm issues a statement immediately. The error in the diligence files was clerical, a software migration issue, not fraud, not negligence, a glitch. The FBI won't buy that, Sterling protested. They will if you self-report, I said. You fall on the sword of incompetence to avoid the sword of malice. You pay the fine, you restate the earnings, you take the stock hit. 2, I continued, Greg resigns, effective tonight for personal reasons. No non-compete clause, no non-disparagement clause, and his full bonus for the year is vested and paid out by wire transfer tomorrow morning. His bonus? Sterling sputtered. He almost destroyed the firm. He saved the firm, I corrected, by having a father-in-law who knows where the bodies are buried. Consider it a consultation fee for my services. And 3, I said, leaning over him, my hands flat on the table. You retire, Arthur. Sterling looked up sharply. Excuse me? You step down as managing partner, I said. Health reasons. Stress. I don't care what lie you tell the board, but you are out. Because if you are still running this firm on Monday morning, I will walk that laptop into the U.S. Attorney's office myself. And I won't be filing a civil suit. I'll be filing an indictment. Sterling stared at me. He looked for a bluff. He looked for a crack in the facade. He saw only the gray polyester suit. He saw the cheap pen. He saw the boredom of a man who had sent better men than Arthur Sterling to the electric chair. Okay, Sterling whispered. Okay, I accept. Good, I said. Write it down, sign it, date it. I waited while he wrote. His hand shook. The scrawl was barely legible. He pushed the paper toward me. I picked it up. I folded it. I put it in my pocket next to my reading glasses. Come on, Greg, I said. We're leaving. But the FBI, Greg stammered again. The FBI, I said, opening the glass door, is about to be very disappointed. But that's government work. You get used to it. We walked out of the boardroom. Agent Miller was waiting in the hallway. He looked at me. He looked at Sterling, who was sitting alone at the giant table, head in his hands. "Everything all right, Mr. Holloway?" Miller asked. "Just a misunderstanding, Agent," I said. "Clerical error. Mr. Sterling will be issuing a statement. My client is free to go." Miller looked at me for a long moment. He knew. He knew exactly what had happened. He knew the shark had just been eaten by the Leviathan. "Drive safe, Bill," Miller said. "Good to see you in the wild." "You too, son." We walked out of the building into the cold night air of 6th Avenue. The wind whipped around the skyscrapers, carrying the smell of exhaust and hot dogs. Sarah was crying softly, holding onto my arm. Greg was walking in a daze, carrying his briefcase like it was a bomb that hadn't gone off. We reached the car. I leaned against the hood of the Audi. "You're fired," I said to Greg. Greg blinked. "What?" "You resigned," I said. "But effectively you're fired. You're done at Sterling and Finch. You're done with corporate law." Greg slumped against the car door. He slid down until he was sitting on the curb. He loosened his tie, the 7-fold silk tie that matched his bespoke suit. "Thank you," Greg whispered. He looked up at me. "Bill, Dad, thank you. I thought I was dead. I thought I was going to prison." "You were," I said. "You were halfway through the gate." "How did you do that?" Greg asked, shaking his head. "I mean, you walked in there in that suit and you dismantled him. You quoted Rico like it was a grocery list. Who are you?" I looked down at my suit. The polyester sheen under the streetlights. "I'm a man who knows the difference between the law and the costume," I said. I pointed at his suit, the midnight blue Savile Row masterpiece. It was stained with vomit and wine. It was ruined. "You spent $5,000 on that suit, Greg. You spent 10 years building a career on signaling. You thought if you looked the part, you were the part." I tapped my temple. "The law isn't a fashion show. It's a mechanism. It's a grinder. If you don't know how to operate the gears, you get ground up." "I know," Greg said, his voice breaking. "I was an idiot. I was arrogant. I'm sorry I made fun of you. I'm sorry I treated you like a clerk," I finished. "Yeah." "It's fine," I said. "I like being a clerk. Clerks are invisible. Invisibility is a tactical advantage." I opened the back door of the car. "Tomorrow morning," I said, "after the wire transfer hits your account, you are going to take half of that money and put it in a trust for Sarah. The other half you can keep." "And then what?" Greg asked. "Who will hire me? I'm toxic. Sterling will blacklist me quietly." "No one in big law will hire you," I agreed. "That life is over. The lunches, the suits, the Hamptons, gone." I looked him in the eye. "Go to the public defender's office in the Bronx. They are always hiring. The pay is garbage. The office smells like bleach. The clients are guilty mostly, but you'll actually practice law. You'll stand in front of a judge and fight for a human being's life, not a bank's ledger." Greg looked at his hands. "Public defender? It's the only way to wash the stain off," I said. "Learn what justice actually costs, Greg. It costs more than a suit." Greg nodded slowly. Okay, I will." "Good." I got into the car. "Sarah," I said, "take me home. I have a crossword puzzle I didn't finish." An hour later, I was back in my small house in Queens. I took off the polyester jacket. I hung it carefully on the wooden hanger in the hall closet. I brushed a piece of lint off the lapel. It was a good suit. It had served me well. I walked into the kitchen. I poured a glass of tap water. I sat at the Formica table. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was an encrypted text. I didn't have many contacts who used Signal, but the ones who did were important. Sender. Unknown message. Holloway. Miller just called me. He said you walked into Sterling and Finch and gutted the managing partner without drawing a weapon. Said it was the finest piece of legal surgery he's ever seen. Asterisk. I smiled. I knew the number. It was the Attorney General of New York. A second message popped up. Message. I have a RICO case against a pharmaceutical company. It's messy. I need a lead prosecutor who scares them. I heard you're back. Lunch? I looked at the screen. I looked at the silence of my kitchen. I looked at the crossword puzzle on the table, half finished. I thought about the adrenaline, the chess match, the feeling of the gavel hitting the wood. I typed my reply. I'm retired, Tom. I paused. My thumb hovered over the send button. I added a second line, unless it's interesting. I hit send. I took a sip of water. I picked up my pen, the cheap drugstore ballpoint. I filled in 4 across, 6 letters, the final judgment, Verdict. I capped the pen. The hangman was retired, but the rope was always ready.